Welcome to Money Matters. I am Emily Johnson, Certified Financial Planner and Managing Director of Polaris Capital Advisors, and I am joined, as always, by the one and only amazing DCrowell of Mortgage Network, and we are here to discuss all things where your money matters. So we decided that, and this is a group decision, we decided this morning, actually, that we were going to discuss the Tax Reform Act because we feel that it is impacting the market ups and downs, and it's also impacting, or will have an impact, if it passes, on your pocketbook. So would you like to start?
I would love to start. This is
near and dear to your heart.
Near and dear to my heart. And thank you for the intro. Sometimes it sounds like I'm a circus performer or an animal act or something, but I'm really neither of those things. I'm just an ordinary guy giving his everyday opinions. The tax reform, or in this case, a tax cut, has profound implications in every section of the society. It's one of the only things that the government does universally. In other words, it has a universal impact on every citizen in one way, shape, or form or another. So,
even if you don't pay taxes,
the government's famous for not doing a lot of, doing a lot of things not very well, and for not doing things that other people think that they should do. But the one thing that the government has consistently done fairly aggressively is to pursue taxes of all kinds at the local level. Town taxes, at the county level, at the state level, and at the federal level. Taxation is basically the sum and substance of all politics. That's what fuels it. That's what fuels government. So the big deal in the current tax proposal or tax cut or tax Reform Act is to reduce the corporate tax rate from 35% to 20%. That is 90% of the action. That's it.
The motivation being that it's more in line with other countries. This is just to speak on TV. I know that you don't necessarily feel the same way, but
it's not a feeling that I have. It's actually fact-based. But it's not a feeling.
Got it. All economics is fact-based. I know. Yeah. So in theory, it should actually bring that tax rate down to make us more competitive with other countries, to motivate more companies to do business here, and to hopefully, and I know that repatriation is a portion of it, but it's not the main driver.
So Emily's segue just now was the fact is that the tax rate is coming down from 35 to 20. What Emily just segued to was the promised consequences of that segue. What will happen, excuse me, not of that segue, the consequences of that fact. So if you have a fact, which is the tax rate is going from 35 to 20, what are the hoped for consequences of that reduction? And Emily was just headed in that direction. And
well, the thought, of course, is that if we're taking money out of this pocket, the government still has to run, so we need to put money back in the other pocket somewhere. So if we are reducing the corporate tax rate, then in theory it should drive growth so that it makes up that difference. In theory, it's not necessarily a fact, but in theory.
That's correct, and that's the divide. That's the huge. It's really a right-left divide. It's also a divide amongst economists. It's not clear what will happen. So backing up this whole subject is another fact. And that fact is, which Emily just alluded to, is that the money has to come from somewhere. If you cut what is roughly estimated to be $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion of corporate taxes over the next decade, then that money has to be, on a zero-sum basis, that money has to be found somewhere.
Or it
You
just becomes a
can't-
great big debt.
Well,
or there's
it
that.
becomes another $1.5 billion to $2 billion worth of deficit.
Right.
So the money has to be found somewhere. I'm sorry if I'm going about this in a sort of fourth grade, fifth grade teacher level, but this is the kind of craziness that you're going to hear day after day after day in the news. The fact is the money must be found. One theory about where to find it is
Additional growth.
additional growth in the economy.
Right. That's the goal.
A sustained, well, that's
The anticipated outcome.
the anticipated outcome.
the driver.
Because
the motivator.
The motivator, the
Okay.
driver, the anticipated outcome. Because if you are a Republican Congress wishing to pass precisely this tax bill, then your only reason for doing so would be that outcome. In other words, that it's going to stimulate growth in the economy at a 3% rate instead of the 2% rate where we've been for the last 8 years. That's a 50% growth rate increase in the economy, 50% increase in growth. The
Which
likelihood...
right now we're sort of starting at a low bar. So with growth in our economy at what, 1.5%? Are we even at 2, something like that?
We're at high ones, low twos.
So we'd be adding a 1
quarter
to that.
quarter. We've had 2 quarters in which the growth has been 3%. They have been the last 2 quarters. But 2 quarters do not make a growth rate that you can hang your hat on. So this is the hope. This is the hope. You don't propose it unless you're pretty darn sure you can get it. Because otherwise, what would you be called? Irresponsible, right? You don't set off for California with a half tank of gas in the car and just hope you're going to get there. You kinda, sorta know you're going to get there if you pass this massive tax deduction. Okay, this massive tax reduction. Now,
Well, certainly there are analysts and economists that are behind this that have said this should happen if. There are others
Absolutely.
that say it's a wing and a prayer and it's unlikely. So, but there are those that support it. Just
there are
to
those
be fair.
to be fair, and I'm being fair. I'm staying fact-based, which is it's going to generate a shortfall of $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion, which
Needs to be made up somewhere.
needs to be
Right.
made up somewhere, and
Okay, that's a fact.
there we're going to go, and that's where they hope to make it up. Now, what happens if they're wrong? What happens if the growth rate in the country doesn't go to 3%, thus stimulating and growing the economy enormously and giving the government revenues, increased revenues to make up for that reduction in tax? What happens? Well, the deficit hawks will wake up approximately 3 months from next Tuesday and find the $1.5 trillion elsewhere by cutting expenditure. That's the only other way to do it. Either the economy grows or you cut expenditure.
Or both.
Where can you cut expenditure of these dimensions? Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, and the military.
Well,
and the military.
And Obamacare. I mean, which is not Medicare and Medicaid necessarily.
Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the military are the 4 places where the big numbers sit.
Well, I think that was sort of the thought behind having a healthcare reform prior to this, but since that didn't fly, we're sort of putting the cart before the horse, because the thought had been, well, if we had healthcare reform, then we would have had these cuts, and therefore it would have been easier to cut taxes, and the whole thing would have been great. We could hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but it didn't work out that way. So now we are putting the cart before the horse, or they are doing that, and just saying.
The fact is, there's $1.5 trillion to $2 trillion to find. There's one way to find it, which is growing the economy. The other is to cut social programs.
Well, interestingly, if you actually look at how the economy or if you want to use the stock market and the bond market as indicators that are forward-looking on how investors feel about that, it's been relatively positive. It has been, definitely we've had a little bit more of a rocky road in the past few weeks. However, by and large, and this has been in discussion now for months, it's been a relatively positive.
Oh, absolutely. And in the second half of the show, I'd like to look more closely at each of the beneficiaries, or what's the opposite of a beneficiary? Each of the beneficiaries, or the folks that are hurt by the tax plan as it's now proposed. So one of those is certainly major corporations and the stock market, and we'll be back shortly.
Okay.